Jason stood frozen at Iron Core Gym's entrance, heart pounding, as the receptionist coldly barred him. Veterans aren't allowed during peak hours. Betrayed by the place he thought honored heroes, anger and disbelief ignited a firestorm he never expected. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jason stood frozen for a moment, the fluorescent lights of Iron Core casting cold reflections on his face, his breath shallow but steady. He had faced hostile fire in distant deserts, endured months of relentless patrols, and stared down death more times than he cared to count. Yet here, in his own hometown, the battle was more insidious, unseen and silent, waged not with bullets but with bureaucracy and prejudice. The receptionist's words felt like a betrayal, sharper than any enemy's knife. Veterans aren't allowed during peak hours. The phrase echoed in his mind like a taunt. The irony was brutal. A gym that plastered posters praising community heroes. Yet behind that facade, it turned its back on one of its own. Jason's mind raced, trying to process the cold logic of liability and insurance reasons. It felt like a flimsy excuse, a bureaucratic shield for discrimination dressed up in legalese. He could almost hear the corporate boardroom discussions, the concern over potential PTSD triggers, liability for possible incidents, the supposed risk veterans represented. But none of that could explain the bitter sting in Jason's chest, the humiliation of being deemed too dangerous or unstable to share space with others trying to better themselves. His posture stiffened as the disappointment morphed into anger. He had sacrificed years of his youth, limbs strained and blood spilled for the freedoms and respect that should be owed to every veteran. Now, in civilian life, he was met with suspicion and rejection. The same muscles that once gripped an M4 rifle with steady precision now clenched into fists at the receptionist's dismissive tone. Yet Jason was more than just a veteran. He was a man who believed in discipline, resilience, and community. He wasn't one to back down easily, especially when principles were on the line. The injustice wasn't just personal, it was systemic. The gym, a symbol of health and strength, had become an unintentional battleground for a new kind of fight, one against invisibility and disregard. Word of the band spread through the network Jason had cultivated during his service, the men and women who had sweated and bled alongside him in foreign lands. They weren't just comrades in arms, they were brothers and sisters forged in the crucible of shared hardship. The news hit them like a punch to the gut. Each veteran who heard about Iron Core's policy felt the sting anew. How could a place that glorified strength deny the very people who embodied it? Jason's phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from Mike, a squad mate from Afghanistan, flooded in. "That's messed up, man. They can't treat us like this. We need to do something. I'm not letting them get away with this disrespect." The outrage wasn't just anger. It was a collective wound reopening, a deep-seated frustration with the disconnect between civilian life and the sacrifices veterans made. The community's simmering resentment began to pulse with urgency. It wasn't just about gym access anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and visibility in a world that often moved on too quickly from their service. For Jason and his platoon, the rejection wasn't just a policy. It was a provocation, a call to action that demanded they occupy more than just physical space. They needed to make their presence undeniable, their voices heard, their value recognized. Underneath the anger, there was a fierce loyalty and protective instinct. This was no ordinary fight. It was a battle to remind a city and a society that veterans didn't vanish once they hung up their uniforms. They were still warriors, still brothers and sisters, still deserving of inclusion, not exclusion. As the sun dipped low outside Iron Core's windows, casting long shadows across the gym's empty floor, Jason's resolve solidified. This fight wasn't about muscle or endurance. It was about justice, respect, and reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. The unseen war had just begun. The morning sunlight sliced through the glass facade of Iron Core Gym, casting sharp angles on the concrete plaza outside. The air was thick with a charged anticipation as 30 veterans, Jason's platoon, arrived in a steady, deliberate formation. Some wore their uniforms, their medals glinting faintly beneath civilian jackets. Others wore well-worn jeans and hoodies, but all moved with the same disciplined precision. This was no casual gathering. It was a statement carved out of years of shared sacrifice and quiet frustration. The quiet murmur of the crowd outside grew louder as word spread. The veterans were here, and they weren't leaving. Inside, Tom Reynolds, the gym manager, sat behind his cluttered desk, a frown etched deep on his brow. He had long believed the policy barring veterans during peak hours was a prudent business decision, an unfortunate but necessary measure to protect the gym from potential liability claims he feared could arise from PTSD episodes or combat-related injuries occurring on the premises. To him, it was risk management, not malice. But as he watched Jason and his platoon step inside, filling the gym with an unmistakable aura of quiet strength and resolve, Tom felt the weight of the confrontation pressing down. Jason approached Tom directly, the distance between them charged with unspoken histories. His voice was low but unwavering. "We're not liabilities. We're people. We fought for this country so everyone could have freedoms, including the freedom to work out without prejudice." The words cut through the sterile air, a mixture of dignity and defiance. Jason's gaze held steady, reflecting years of hardship, a refusal to be diminished. Around them, regular gym members, young athletes, weekend warriors, fitness enthusiasts, paused their routines to watch the unfolding drama. Some nodded subtly, silently acknowledging the veterans' right to stand their ground. Others shifted uneasily, unsure how to react to the charged atmosphere. The gym, a place usually filled with the rhythmic clang of weights and steady thuds of treadmills, had transformed into a tense arena where silent protest met institutional resistance. Days stretched on, the veterans' presence unyielding. News crews, alerted by social media and eyewitness accounts, began to converge. Cameras captured close-ups of weathered faces hardened by combat, yet vulnerable beneath the public spotlight. Reporters asked questions that echoed deeper societal questions. How does a community honor its protectors when the scars they bear remain invisible? What does it mean to support veterans beyond symbolic gestures? The story quickly escalated from a local dispute to a broader reflection on the fractured relationship between civilians and those who served. For Jason and his platoon, the public attention was a double-edged sword. While the support from some corners was palpable, the scrutiny also opened old wounds. Conversations with strangers, whether sympathetic or critical, rekindled memories of battles fought long ago, battles now mirrored in their fight for recognition and respect. Veterans shared stories of isolation, the silent struggles with trauma, the invisible wars waged daily within themselves. The gym's rejection became a symbol, a flashpoint that crystallized a painful truth. Even after service, many veterans remain marginalized in ways that society often fails to understand. The emotional toll weighed heavily. The frustration of being labeled as risks or liabilities stung deeper than any physical injury. The sense of being unseen, misunderstood, even feared by the very communities they protected gnawed at their resolve. Yet beneath the pain was a resilient core, a refusal to be erased or dismissed. The gym's polished floors bore witness to this quiet rebellion, the veterans' collective stance, an unyielding demand not just for access, but for dignity. Their silent occupation challenged the narrative that had kept them at the margins, forcing a community to confront uncomfortable questions about fairness, respect, and inclusion. As the standoff persisted, the battle lines between policy and principle hardened, echoing a larger societal struggle to reconcile gratitude with genuine support. The veterans' fight at Iron Corps was no longer just about gym hours. It was about reclaiming their place in the fabric of a society that owed them more than words. The atmosphere in the boardroom was taut with tension, a charged mix of apprehension and cautious hope. Jason sat at the long polished table, flanked by members of his platoon whose faces bore the same weary resolve that had defined their standoff. Across from them, the Iron Corps gym board members exchanged glances, their earlier rigidity softened by the mounting public pressure and the undeniable moral weight of the issue. The gym, once a fortress of exclusion, now faced a reckoning not just from veterans, but from the broader community watching closely, demanding accountability. Hours of discussion unfolded, the air thick with earnest voices and hard truths. Jason spoke not just as a man wronged, but as a representative of thousands of veterans whose sacrifices were often glossed over by polite speeches and hollow gestures. He articulated the invisible wounds, the mental scars of combat, the physical toll, the relentless battle to reclaim normalcy that no insurance policy could quantify or justify excluding. His words resonated with a quiet power, stripped of bitterness, but layered with unyielding clarity. Veterans were not liabilities. They were a community deserving of support and respect. The board's initial defenses, rooted in liability concerns and risk aversion, gradually gave way under the weight of Jason's unwavering conviction and the undeniable evidence of community outrage. The narrative shifted from one of division to one of potential healing. It became clear that true responsibility lay not in avoidance, but in proactive inclusion. When the gym's leadership finally agreed to the compromise, a specialized veterans fitness program staffed by professionals trained in combat trauma and physical rehabilitation, it marked a pivotal turning point. This was not a mere policy tweak. It was a structural transformation that acknowledged the complex realities veterans face. The program would blend physical training with psychological support, creating a safe space where veterans could rebuild strength in both body and mind. Tom Reynolds, visibly moved, stepped forward to deliver a public apology that carried the weight of sincere remorse. He admitted the gym's previous policy had been short-sighted and insensitive, a failure that contradicted the gym's stated values. His pledge to make Iron Corps a place that honored veterans rather than pushing them away was not just words. It was a commitment to changing the culture at every level. As word of the agreement spread, the veterans' occupation came to an end, not with bitterness or resentment, but with a palpable sense of triumph. The gym, once a symbol of exclusion and misunderstanding, began its transformation into a beacon of inclusion and healing. For Jason, the victory was deeply personal and profoundly inspiring. The fight had been grueling, but the outcome reaffirmed a fundamental truth. Change was possible when people stood united. Jason's story quickly transcended local borders, becoming a rallying cry across the nation. Communities everywhere began to scrutinize their own practices and attitudes toward veterans, spurred by the example set at Iron Corps. The gym's journey from rejection to embrace illustrated a broader societal imperative, to move beyond token gestures and toward genuine respect and care. This victory was more than the overturning of a policy. It was a reclaiming of dignity for those who had long been marginalized, a testament to the power of unity in confronting injustice. It underscored that healing was not just an individual process, but a communal responsibility. Through collective resolve, Jason and his platoon had not only reshaped a gym's policies, they had sparked a movement toward honoring the sacrifices of veterans with the respect and support they truly deserved.